Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of MPA 545 Conflict Resolution and Labor Negotiations. My name is Greg Zargo, and this is my presentation. For this week, we've been asked to identify 4 concepts in the first 3 chapters and pick out 4 authors from the reference page. Um, so let's get started. So for the very first concept, I felt it was important to try and define conflict. After all, the class surrounds conflict and labor negotiations, so um, I thought it was the right step to take. In box 1.2, page 3 of chapter 1, it gives us many different definitions, and that's because the textbook also tells us that um, to define conflict, it's very complex. There's a lot of different definitions for different situations, um, and so it's hard to pick just one. Um, and after looking at the different authors there on box 1.2, I went with Joyce Hawker, who defined conflict as an expressed struggle between at least 2 interdependent parties who perceived incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from the other party in achieving their goals. And after looking at our book, Interpersonal Conflict, um, Joyce Hawker does more than try to define what conflict is. As a matter of fact, sorry, she actually says that conflict is not inherently a bad thing. Um, that people learn from conflict, and she gives us different ways to try to solve conflict between people and to look at the nature of conflict, the types of conflict, and the sources of conflict, and what each party or each person brings into the dispute. I found it interesting. I thought that something that I can definitely build off of. So on page 5 of our text, we discuss equity theory. And equity theory is the perceived fairness in outcomes in relation to how much an individual inputs and receives as compared to others. If an individual feels that they are not receiving equal outcome to others, then this can create conflict at work or any scenario and can lead to feelings of frustration, anger, and low motivation. In Homan's article, Social Behavior as an Exchange, he further added to this scenario in a work setting where one group of individuals feel that their compensation should have been more than the other group of people because they perceive the value of their work to be higher because they had more responsibility. Um, and this is something that I definitely see in the workforce nowadays, especially when new people are being hired. They come in with a higher salary than people who may have been there for years, and even if when they try to create the fairness as our text suggests, sometimes the compensation is not as great as an individual believes to be. So that creates conflict as well. Um, and our text does say that there are other ways to try to fix this, to restore the equity. One is by the raising the awareness and um, finding ways to create a sense of fairness by finding ways to compensate the people that are harmed, or in this scenario that I mentioned was the people that have been there the longest. Okay, so for this slide, I'm going to be talking about negotiation or the negotiation process. Our book does a good job of setting up what negotiation is, coming in good faith, establishing the problem, coming in with good attitudes, separating the people from the problem, and Uri and Fisher, or Fisher and Uri, go into a little more depth about this. They talk about how it's important to, like I said earlier, to separate the people that are having the conflict from the problem and to establish what the problem actually is, um, and to focus on the interest of each party and to find out what's flexible on either side and what's a hard yes, um, and to come up with options for a mutual gain. So I really found that interesting. I think that's something that I've applied before when I've negotiated salaries in the past. What I'm willing to give, a number that I'm have in mind, and in previous years where other benefits were more important than the salary number. Um, so I thought it was an interesting read on both ends. Okay, finally, the last concept that I found really interesting, kind of made me laugh along the way because it reminded me of the show Suits, was destructive tactics. Um, and it talked about how a couple of the tactics that companies use, they use the good guy, bad guy technique, bad faith negotiations, lack of authority, to name a few. Um, and Douglas Amy wrote a book, The Politics of Environmental Mediation. And his concern was over environmentalists uh, maybe not being prepared for litigation, and that they would be taken advantage of in the negotiation process. Um, and so it was an interesting summary of the book to know that in the end he didn't really have faith in the process, that the environmentalists can take care of that themselves. Um, Good read. I enjoyed this little part immensely. That concludes my presentation for this week. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to listening to yours. God bless and have a good week.